Alex, I wanted to hit a little bit, you had mentioned around distribution. I'd love to spend a little bit of time about how you're thinking about distribution, specifically around customer acquisition costs. That can, like traditional means, can be typically pretty high. So, as you're thinking of these new waves and new products, are you thinking of new creative ways to kind of outside those paid traditional acquisition channels? Are you to think of new creative ways to effectively reach new markets?
Yeah, it's an interesting question and a deeply important one to a lot of insurance production businesses, certainly. First of all, and I can't take credit for this decision, other folks at the company made a very intentional decision to position ourselves as a wholesale brokerage. We distribute through independent agents, so we're not, and people do this great, Vouch being one of them, but there's dozens of other companies. We don't have to figure out how to market directly to the insureds. We rely on third-party salespeople to do that in that realm. Now, we still got to market and convince these 30,000 independent insurance agencies to try a new wholesaler. And again, this is the stuff they don't want to screw up. They don't do every day. So it's in some ways the scariest part of their business to bring to a new entrant. To your question on interesting things, we've been very lucky, and this is a timing thing, that because commercial insurance has digitized or is digitizing, it's a foregone conclusion to me at this point, and it's going to be self-service, it's going to be technology driven. But because that's happened, there's all these platforms, quoting or placement platforms, but also digital agencies that do have relationships or operations of acquiring businesses, and they've gone through all their admitted book, their BOP book, and their workers' comp book, and they've digitized it. And now they're getting to that E&S stuff, and they're realizing they need, the same way our carriers need digital trading partners, the digital platforms out there that are the backbone of digitization in the industry are they're looking for wholesale trading partners to access. And so we've been fortunate enough to, again, because we're sort of half technology company, half insurance company, our architecture is API driven, and we were able to spin up partnerships to do proofs of concept quite well to figure out how we deliver our product in their environment, or parts of our product offering in their environment. And that's been a great way to start acquiring new clients through those types of partnerships. And I don't know if it's particularly innovative, but it's definitely it speaks to this wave of insurtechs. Like, they're eager to do this because they're saying, well, 75% of my business is placed digitally, and then I use email for this other wholesale stuff, and you're telling me that you could do some of it on the internet. And we're like, I think so. Let's try and figure it out, type thing. And it's, of course, matured from there, but that's one thing that's worked for us. And I wouldn't say that that's unique to PathPoint. That's a tried and true partnership strategy in insurance, which makes it kind of quite an interesting market too.
Right. Yeah, John, I'd love to hear your thoughts, with your experience in the industry, around distribution and finding new markets, and maybe more creative ways that haven't been looked at before.
Yeah, I mean, a couple thoughts on this, and sorry, this might be a little bit meandering. To start with, Vouch is a direct provider. So we're not working through independent agents, brokers. We have our own sales team, licensed agents that answer questions for clients. We obviously have a number that are coming straight through, and binding insurance all through the digital experience. But for those that have questions, they can go to our agents. So, with that said up front, couple things I observe that I'm just throwing them out there as interesting observations. I'm not sure how they're going to play out and what it ultimately means in the long run. But two things that are interesting. One, and this is not a new thing, but I hear it talked about more and more, which is, how do agents and brokers become much more efficient with the small stuff? They will tell you behind closed doors, not in front of clients, that it's a money loser for them to work with a client that's generating 1,000 or even 2,000 of total premium. And there's different ways they can solve for that, but many brokers, large brokers that I talk to, of the top three, will tell you their structure just isn't built to be able to handle the small business clients. And so I'm not sure where that goes. I'm more sharing an observation. And then the other is, and I was just reading an article on this morning, the consolidation of power with the largest brokers out there, I think, does continue to grow. If you look at the market cap of the largest 5 brokers, it is catching up, or in some instances, surpassing the largest carriers that are out there. And so I share that observation because the largest brokers are growing in terms of their overall value. And, I think that is coming purely through scale and purchasing power, ability to leverage some of the carriers out there. Just my hypothesis, but it seems that some of the largest carriers, I guess saying it directly, I'm not sure they're making tons of advancements in the small or even mid-sized space and becoming more efficient and getting the clients more of what they need. I don't think they are. I think they're just doing it through pure purchasing power and scale that they gain in the market. So nothing profound there, I suppose, but just a couple dynamics that I continue to watch, and I think will probably play out in the coming years and have impact on how we operate.
Yeah, Jen, I'm curious, as kind of back office outsider looking in, almost, are a lot of these things that John mentioned what you're seeing with the different organizations that you're working with, especially the successful ones?
Yeah, I think I'll say for us, what we've been thinking a lot about and watching some of the same things that you're looking at, John, is that we're just appreciating that there's going to be some pretty big shifts that aren't straightforward to predict in terms of how people engage with these processes, specifically agents up and down the stack. And part of this I've talked about in some other talks where there was this idea of, oh, the agent is going away, and we were very clearly opinionated that that's not going to happen. But there are going to be points, like John is saying, where there isn't a valuable flow for them to be as hands-on. And as the industry gets its hands on more technology and starts to think about different structures, there's going to be an opportunity for tools and applications in that space to support those diversification of workflows, or maybe consolidation of how you approach different parts of the market. And so that's what we think a lot about here is, what are our customers thinking about and seeing, and why do they want to automate? Is it, because they're not seeing the value in a certain set of activities in a certain space? Who's going to come in and fill that space? Maybe not who, but a series of who's, or what is a new mode going to be? And it's a really exciting time for that. One thing that we think a lot about here is not being overly opinionated. I'll say Alex and John are in the forefront of thinking about what's going to change. And we're thinking a lot about how do we support those changes in an effective way across multiple entities where possible. So there's a lot to come there, but I think about it more as like it's a great space to see how people are testing things. Some things are going to work, some things are not going to work, and watching that is pretty fascinating.
To put it, what I think the way Jen's thinking about it is really interesting. An example came to mind, like in the wholesale space, it's traditionally very regional, at least the sort of delegated authority business, which we do. I won't get into the jargon, but so point being is you'd have a wholesaler in a region that really knew how to underwrite construction businesses in that region. They'd also really be acutely aware of what carriers wrote, what the compliance requirements were with state regulators, but the scale by which the insurtechs want to operate on, it sort of necessitates a national footprint, and we're guilty / fortunate of the same thing, right? And what that changes is your back office systems and operational systems have to be tuned a lot. The audit trail of them, the way they're monitored, the way they're deployed is a more complex space because you're doing it across different regions and different states. And so you can do all these things in a spreadsheet for one state, you can get it up to 10 states, but at some point to do it in a to have the data unsiloed, to have this paper trail, the needs of the people in the market, us in particular, are going to be served by different tools, agents being one of them, but there's quite a few others, I think. Sorry, just hopefully that adds some color to Jen's point.
Yeah, no, that's great.
I was going to say on that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, please, Jen.
Because Alex, you made me think about this. Something that we think a lot about is how to demystify some of this. One thing that I appreciated coming in was that you have people, and you just highlighted it with regional, who have really deep embedded, incredibly valuable knowledge. And it can make it quite difficult for someone who wants to do this at scale to address a workflow in the right way. So we think about this with the states. There's 50 states and some territories that we participate with, and they approach different limited lines, different aspects differently. And when we had to extend our model to support surplus, it was quite complex. Now, the reality is, if we can take that complexity and build it into an application, then someone else can be successful in that space without having to have that deeply embedded knowledge. And that will help support some new and different models of distribution that I'm not gonna be able to describe to you. Someone else on this call maybe will invent or describe, but it's quite neat when you start to think about unpacking not just data, but also knowledge about, what are these underpinning drivers? And I think John said this earlier, there's complexity that's there for a reason. Some we need to retain, and some we can maybe evolve past. And for what we want to retain, how do we make that more accessible to more people, so that they can create models that are more leveraged and more scaling, which is pretty neat. Also some really complicated edge cases within some states. So a lot of good engineering brains in my org tackling those, but quite fun to unpack.
Kentucky taxes commercial insurance at the city level, which would be sort of a canonical edge case example of the stuff that John, Jen, and I are all dealing with, or trying to deal with, I should say.
Yeah, I would. And just to extend this, going back to an earlier question, Patrick, on technology and how that gets used. One thing I didn't mention, but we do spend a fair amount of time actually thinking about, and I don't often talk about it much, just because it's not necessarily client facing, but the ability to use technology to manage that complexity is huge. And I think the next wave of insurtechs and those who can figure that out will be extraordinarily benefited, and that benefit will ultimately benefit the clients. But great examples here. There's so many edge cases, and every time you have to bring an engineer in to program something to address one of these edge cases, it's very costly. And so if you can think about developing systems where engineers don't have to come in and program that edge case, but an administrator of the system can do it, that has tremendous value. And that's something we're actually working on at Vouch, and have made progress on with pricing and some other services oriented architecture. More to come on that, but I just think managing complexity is something we will hear more and more about. Maybe not in those exact words, but it's helpful.
Everybody's building a rules engine. We're all building a rules engine somewhere in our stack.
I mean, John just hit the existential product engineering question on the head. Like, you can handle it systematically, but you're asking your engineers to adjust what they were working on to handle this edge case that the operations team is now bottlenecked on, or our sales team is bottlenecked on. And that's a tough decision. Or you can say, well, we'll do it manually. And that's okay to do, but then you end up, again, it's not that we're trying to take humans out of it, but then the expertise is just in someone's head, or it's done in a very ad hoc and unsystematic way. And so neither is right or wrong, but you have to strike this like internal culture that's also very client driven, to have really good intuition on when to treat it systematically or when to treat it manually, which I think is what John is talking about. How about you like reduce complexity? And it's interesting to think about, because it is an architecture problem too, I think, and I'm sure agents think this, but to Jen's point, it's all about rules engines and when you delegate to a person versus the machine, and it's all the same in the end, I think.